So, a few years ago, I awoke in the night just raging at myself for not feeling good enough, not feeling like I was accomplishing anything, just general self loathing. And I heard a voice tell me, give yourself the moon. And although I was aware that I was alone in the room, that voice was powerful enough that it cut through the haze I was floating around in, and I was able to fall back asleep. When I woke up the next day, I still remembered those words and continued taking a lot of comfort in them and feeling quite enamored with them. During this time, my wife had just moved back to France, very unexpectedly. We knew that we would eventually be moving to France together. She's from here. However, we didn't know it was going to happen so soon, and for me, I was in a lot of denial about the whole thing and hoped that somehow magically it would just never happen and it would be years and years away. See, I was very attached to all my comforts and ties and the things I had built in the US. Change is very difficult for me, and I was not into this. I didn't know how to cope with the idea of leaving everything I loved behind, and if I'm being honest, I didn't even know how to cope with the idea of leaving everything I hated. But I guess fate or whatever intervened and took my wife away from me, and we ended up having to briefly, meaning for 2 years, pretty much live separate lives in our separate countries because both of us had so much going on, and it was definitely not easy. During this time, I of course was supposed to move as well, but the complications that came up around that are just far too numerous to name, and with all of that going on, I have to admit I was not doing well. I was not doing well at this time at all. I was going through one of the worst depressions of my adult life, and I was also dealing with financial hell and trying to plan this move with her, and she was dealing with a lot, and it was just a bit of a mess. And this isn't in any way meant to be a woe is me story. My gods, please don't take it that way. All of this is just to say, I was really clinging to those words I had heard in the night, but I wasn't really understanding their meaning, not truly. It wasn't for about 2 more years when they actually began to take shape for me. So, as a way to cope with my upcoming move, I decided to make art, which is something I do anytime I have to cope with anything. For me, art is very grounding. It's not so much an escape as it is a way to process things and understand my own inner emotions, I guess. So I thought I would make a collection of work around those words that I had heard in the night. But because I was moving to France, and as much as I didn't want to move, I did want to embrace this inevitability. It's a hard word to say. So I thought, well, let's translate those words to French. And some of you may know where this is going. From Give Yourself the Moon, we got Donne-toi la lune. And once I had those words, I wrote them down in my journal so that I could pull them out and look at them anytime. And I began to have grand ideas about this collection of art I would make. It was just going to be various pieces related to my emotions around this move and this transition in my life. Well, that didn't happen. In fact, I think I only painted one piece around that theme. And after that, I spent the rest of the time creating smaller works when I could, and otherwise panicking over finances, over trying to get this move together, even though it kept getting delay after delay after delay. And much of my art suffered. I longed so badly to do more art during this time, and yet my fear was keeping me so tied to these other things that I felt I had to be doing. And truly, in those moments, I felt I needed to be prioritizing these other things. but I think my art suffered more than it should have. So about 2 years later, I hadn't made more art around those words. But one day, if you watched my last video, you'll know that an idea hit me. I thought about the thing that Dans Toi la Lune would actually become. And it hit me so hard that I was honestly afraid at first. I was about to move. This was about 2 months out from my actual move, finally. I had worked so hard for this move. I had worked so hard. I had even finally reached a point of peace about the transition, and I even began to look forward to it, which was massive for me. I did not expect that to happen. But then this idea hit with such force, and I was like, no, I can't be devoting to this right now. I need to be practical. So I gave it a few days to kind of sit and simmer, and during that time it would not leave me alone. And I thought, well, maybe this is just a whim. I mean, I did just watch that Super Eye Patch Wolf video about fake games, and it was really beautiful and compelling. But I think I had to come to realize pretty quickly that it was more than that. Much of my life, I have been just so in love with different forms of art. Growing up, I actually did a lot of writing behind the scenes that really never saw the light of day. I've written so many silly little novels, and also several less silly novel drafts that I've never done anything with. I've come up with so much story and recurring themes within my work, and as a child I actually wanted to make video games. What child doesn't? Until I got a book on coding and played with some free programs and realized I didn't want to make video games. Shout out to game devs, you're incredible. I truly admire that skill, but it just wasn't something I actually felt passionate about once I understood it. How often does that happen to us when we finally understand what something takes? Lucky for me, the thing that made me motivated to do art stuck around, because that's obviously the direction I've taken in my life. But I've never forgotten those other passions. I've always wanted to come back to them. And this idea hit with such force that I thought, this is a way to bring so many of my loves together. And fairly quickly, once I accepted that this idea needed to exist, I realized I also already had characters and stories for it. Throughout years of my body of work, I had been creating so many different little metaphors and stories and recurring themes that I was able to pull from much of that for this project. So I fairly early on decided that the protagonists of this project would be my beloved Ochre Queen, whom I've been painting for years. I've called them by different names, painted them in different forms, but they've always had the same soul to me. And if I was going to use the Ochre Queen, I knew who needed to go into the project with her. I knew there was a figure she absolutely could not live without, and that was the Huntsmink. The Huntsmink I've also been painting in many forms and by many names for years. Once I had these two characters, the rest of the story just began to unravel, and I'd spend so many days just eking out time to write little notes down. I even filmed myself. I remember when I finally came up with, I say finally, but it happened honestly so quickly. When I came up with an idea for the plot, I remember filming myself and telling the camera for whatever reason, because I was just so excited. And I just fell so in love with this project, and I couldn't wait to get to France because I was like, I am going to be able to devote so much time to this. Well, as some of you know, if you did watch my last video, once I got to France, things didn't quite happen as quickly as I hoped. I kind of fell back into the same patterns of fear and, if I'm being honest, self-loathing. That's something I've actually struggled with my whole life pretty much. I have struggled with my mental health since I was too little to even know that was a thing. So for a long time, I think like many of us, I just normalized those feelings and thought it's just how like human creatures work. This is just the way it is. It's supposed to be this way. We're supposed to feel like this, and we just need to get over it and grind through the process. See, I was always really slow to learn things. I was homeschooled my entire life, actually, by my choice. I always had the option to go to public school if I wanted to, but although I was in a lot of extracurricular classes and activities with other children, my like basic education was done through a program at home, and it was a chore. Anytime I had to learn, it was such a chore. I remember I did go to like a public school for like a day or so, I think, just to interview kind of and have them like give me this trial run or something to see if I wanted to go there. And I remember the feelings of shock because it was so hard. It just felt like any time in my life where I had a situation where there was a boss or a teacher telling me to do something, I like could not process what they were saying at all. Growing up, I remember like using the worst slurs against myself, thinking that maybe I was just, I think you know what I'm getting at. And at that time, of course, I didn't know about autism, which answered a lot of questions for me later on in life. But all of this struggle that I had growing up with my learning style actually ended up doing me favors with my art, because as difficult as it was for me to learn things that people were trying to teach me, I was better able to teach myself when I fell in love with something and I fell hard for art. And it gave me a sort of tenacity to grind and push through my projects. However, although that served me well in art, that same grinding led to me kind of trying to do the same anytime I was experiencing a lot of emotions, just grit through it. All of this long-winded explanation is to say that at this point, I had become I had fallen so in love with those words I heard in the night. I had finally formed this big emotional project around them, but I still didn't understand what they meant for me. What did those words actually mean? Why were they said to me? I think I've only recently begun to understand. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't think I was going to film today. I woke up, I didn't shower, did not brush my hair, and it is as much of a rat's nest as it looks. And I went on a long walk with my beautiful dog Shinigami to try to journal through a lot of emotions. See, during the process of coming up with the idea for this video and working on it, something really big happened in my life. I don't want to be scary or anything, like my health is okay. But something quite difficult happened. And it kind of followed after a couple of weeks of just feeling very off and struggling, which is maybe due to a number of other things that have been going on. But this new thing that's happened has thrown me for even more of a loop. It feels like this whole situation with being in France is just the gift that keeps on giving, and by gift I mean struggle. However, struggle can be a gift at times, because it's often through struggle that we find our true selves. As cringe as that may sound, I'm sorry, but I think we all know it's true. So, through this new situation, I've been faced with the option of shutting down and crying on the floor, which I dearly wanted to do this morning, to be honest, or finding a way to work despite everything happening. And when I say work, I don't mean grinding through it and forcing myself. So, with this situation, I was reaching a point where I realized I don't think I can work normally right now. I haven't been able to work normally in a while, but the one thing I have had is passion for this project, unlike anything I've ever felt in my life. And I don't want to let these struggles and these emotions destroy that for me. However, I also can't force my way through this work. So, Dans Toi la Lune, although it's a dark fantasy told through the aesthetic of a video game that doesn't exist, the meaning behind that title is about completion and cycles. Even the moon isn't always at its brightest. The moon allows itself cycles of being more or less full. All of us are probably in different cycles. I think I have been in my new moon empty cycle or near empty cycle. Perhaps I have just a little sliver of crescent to give. And recently, I was in a full moon cycle where I had just deep, intense passion for a couple of weeks, almost manically pursuing my work and just so deeply in love. So it makes sense that perhaps a new moon had to follow. I'm not saying any of this holds any real logic. I'm just saying that something happened to me in the middle of the night one time. I took a lot of comfort from it, but it wasn't until recently that I truly started to take to heart the wisdom of those words. And even when I started to understand them, I was still fighting against those cycles. I've always found that when it comes to inspiration, it's better for me to work for it rather than sit around and wait for it. But working for inspiration doesn't always equal a grind. Sometimes it equals slow, intentional rest, intentional refueling with inspiration, giving yourself the moon, allowing yourself to be in what phase you are. Don't let it become permanent and completely drop your dreams. That's not the same as intentional rest. And I think that's where many of us kind of go to one extreme or another. Either we grit through it so hard that we burn out, or we wait around so long that the dream fades entirely. I don't want to have that happen to this project, and I don't think it will. But for my own sake, I've realized I need to allow myself to create in a way that exists in function of how I'm doing. Thank you so much if you stuck around for all of that. This was much longer than I thought it would be and went in such a different direction than I thought it originally would. I didn't expect it to get so raw and personal, but if you're close to me, you know I pretty much always take things to raw, dark, personal places. It's not for everyone, but I don't know how to mask that part of myself either. So if this resonates with you, I hope you'll also give yourself the moon, whatever phase you're in. And I hope that if you're also working toward a dream, you'll understand that you can still pursue that dream. Just you may need to find a way that works with where you're at. Just don't let it go entirely. I want to end with a couple of questions I've gotten about this project. You're welcome to ask questions in the comments if you'd like to, and I will shout you out if I get to answer them in this or a future video. So let's go ahead with those questions. So, my dear Corvophilia on Instagram asked, are any of the characters from the game real animals or have they mostly come from dreams? So many features of this project are dream-based because much of my work is dream-based, and this project is based on much of my work. The two protagonists aren't exactly dream-based. They're based on years of exploration, shall we say. But yes, there are many dream-based creatures in this project, which is a whole video topic of itself that I may actually make at some point. Translucent Mermaid over on Instagram asked how long between the first thought of Don Toile Lune and the decision to build a project around it. I guess I kind of answered that question with this entire video. It took about 2 years before the idea for the actual project hit me after I first heard those initial words. I've been getting a lot of questions about what this project will become, like if it will become a physical thing that can be purchased. So, as I've mentioned before, it is a fake video game. It is really a dark fairy tale told through the aesthetic of video games. What that means is it's a bunch of illustrated screenshots with a video game flair. And although I have a lot of thoughts about what a real game would have been like, including gameplay and such, I don't intend to make this a real game. What I do intend to do is make a guidebook, a larger sort of art book that talks about the lore and maybe the gameplay and some of the making of, with lots of art and concept art and all of that. So eventually, essentially, it will be a sort of art book with some story elements. I also do plan to make a soundtrack in collaboration with my gorgeous wife, and we're going to package that up like a actual video game in a case with like a little mini game manual. So I'm actually probably the most excited for that. This is a long way out, but that's my plan. So Nebular Cerebrum over on Instagram asked if I have a specific piece that was kind of the turning point to find my style. I think a lot of people will tell you also that it kind of just forms organically. For me, my current style was most formed, I believe, honestly, through the piece that I'll put on screen, Purge the Smoke. This was the piece that made me understand that I needed to put even more of my raw self into my work. Before that, I feel that a lot of my pieces were more fantastical and ethereal, and after this, I think they got a bit more emotional. And that's when I think I got even closer to my work. I think we all go through phases of our creations over the years where they shift and change and the outward appearance changes, but for me, over the years, I've always found that as long as I'm putting the things I truly want to put into the work, like the imagery, no matter how weird it may seem, the emotions, the stories, that's kind of what naturally helps me form a style, I guess. Reaching for Divine on Instagram asked what I'm the most excited to explore with this project. This is gonna sound silly, but honestly, almost everything. I'm in love with every aspect of this project. It has been so difficult. It is constantly pulling me out of my comfort zones and challenging me, and there have been so many moments of self-doubt and, of course, fighting that recurring self-loathing, but it's also taught me so much. And during the process of creating this project, I also began voice journaling, something I may get into in another video. But it's been really cool to sometimes listen back to those journals and watch myself go through moments of struggle all the way until I've found a solution. I actually had that experience this morning on my walk, although unrelated to this project specifically. So yes, I'm excited to work on everything. I'm sorry, that's such a silly answer, but I really am. I know there are parts of it that I won't enjoy as much. I think that's okay. I think it's okay to accept that when you're in love with doing something, you're still working for it. I'm not a big fan of that phase that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I do understand what it's getting at, but I don't ever want people to have this idea that there aren't going to be like moments of a bit of struggle when you're pursuing what you love, and pain isn't always a bad thing. We just need to make sure it's the right sort of pain. To me, it's kind of the difference between chronic pain or the pain of working a muscle in order to grow it. Both things come with pain, but at least to me, a sore muscle because I was lifting something, like in a healthy way, obviously, is so preferable to chronic pain. You never want to put yourself in a chronic pain position with your work, but a healthy, growing struggle, a growing pain, isn't a bad thing. I think it's just important that we learn to recognize the difference. That's going to be it today, my dears. I hope that you enjoyed this video again if you stuck around, and if you like what I do and you want to see more content where I start out trying to talk about this project and end up just spilling my guts and oversharing, please leave a like and feel free to subscribe because, again, I'm terrible at masking and I don't see these videos getting any more professional than this. Have a beautiful day or night wherever you are, and be well. Bye! Get ready for the squeakiest floor dance you've ever heard.